and we'll get started. So just to remind everybody, we are recording today. Welcome to this 7th episode of Teaching Unpacked. It's hard to believe it's been 7, that it's gone really fast. So our 7th episode, and today we're so happy to have with us Alex Shevrin Venet, who is going to be, she just has some great stuff to share with us today. Before we start though, I want to take a second and offer some thank yous. First to Peter and Molly Eppig. It is through their generosity that the Teaching Unpacked series has been able to happen. So we're so grateful to them for their generous support. We also want to thank Harold Hale, who is here behind the scenes and who will help anybody out who has technical issues during our time together today. And last, Peg Smeltz and Shelley Viles, who have helped us with registrations and getting the word out and making sure that everyone who wanted to be with us today was able to find their way here. And for folks who, for whatever reason, registered and weren't able to be here today, they'll also be the folks that send out the link to the recording, as well as the evaluation form and the resources document so that you can get your participant of or certificate of participation if you need that. Let's see. So I think we start off just by introducing ourselves. So Tom, do you want to go first?
Hello, everyone. Tom Julius here, a faculty member at Antioch University, New England, and director of the Integrated Learning Elementary Teacher Certification Program. And before joining the faculty at Antioch, I had 17 years of experience in elementary schools, first as a kindergarten teacher, second grade teacher, and then for 14 years as a third grade teacher.
And I'm Laura Thomas, and I'm in my 19th year at Antioch. My second year as the director of the Experienced Educators Program. And before that, I taught high school speech, theater, debate, and English outside of Kansas City, Missouri, and then also in Massachusetts for a few years. And and as I said, I'm in my second year with the Experienced Educators Program. I'm also a one-day-a-week librarian out in Harrisville, New Hampshire, where I teach K-6 library 1 day a week. And I work for Edutopia as a community facilitator and a contributing editor. So we have a couple of housekeeping things to take care of before we jump forward. Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about the chat versus the Q&A and how we're going to use that today?
Well, I know if you have a question about your connectivity or any technical issues, the chat is a place to put that. We're also going to be using the chat for a little activity coming up. And then if you have questions for Alex, that you'd like us to address, the Q&A is a good place for that, because Laura will be monitoring that, and then she'll be able to pose those questions to Alex when the time is right.
Yeah, and any of those that don't get answered during our time together, we'll pass along to Alex, and she may be able to answer some of them in the resources document, or the resources you're looking for may already be there. So I do see there's a question already. Will we share the slides? We won't be sharing the slides, but unless Alex chooses to put them on the resources page. But a lot of the content that's there is available through the resources that she's offering. So the slides themselves won't be shared though. So, and the last piece of housekeeping is just that if this is the intellectual property here belongs to Antioch University, New England, and to Alex. You're welcome to use any of the content that you learn here, but please cite either Antioch or Alex when you do so. Alex has done a lot of hard work to learn what she's learned, and we like to give her credit for that. So Tom, you want to go ahead and introduce Alex?
Alex Shevrin Venet, welcome to Teaching Unpacked. It is so good to have you with us. Alex is former alternative therapeutic school teacher and leader. She's currently a consultant, facilitator. She's an Antioch alumnus and soon to be a book author. And Alex, what is the title and the publication plan for the book?
So my book is called Equity-Centered Trauma-Informed Education, very on the nose, and that will be coming out sometime in late spring or early summer of 2021. So we're a little ways away, but over the next few months, I should hopefully be able to share out some pieces that are going to be part of that, a cover, you know, all that exciting stuff is underway.
Right. Well, then we'll let you sort of take over, take the wheel here.
All right. So we're going to start with just a quick moment of checking in with ourselves and checking in with others. So the first thing we're going to do is just a mindful moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my camera for about 30 seconds and invite Laura and Tom to do the same. And just take a minute to check in with myself, you know, notice if my shoulders are up by my ears or my jaw is tight, you know, maybe shake it out or stretch a little bit. I invite you to just sort of check in with yourself to be here now, or use those 30 seconds however you'd like to. And I'll see you back on the other side in just a moment. All right, we're back. So the other piece I like to do before we get started in any learning experience is to take a moment to check in with those that we're learning with. So for this check-in, I invite you to respond in the chat if you would like to. And if you drop down where it says to, you should see an option that says all panelists and attendees. That's if you'd like to share with everyone. If you'd like to just share with me and Laura and Tom privately, you can leave it at all panelists, or you can just think to yourself. And I would love to hear folks just share one word of how you're doing right now. So just putting in the chat, just one word of how you're doing right now. And as folks are doing that, I'm just taking a moment to look at the words coming by. And as a facilitator and a member of a learning community, I like to just take in these types of check-ins to just sort of get that temperature check on the room and just see how folks are. And as a participant, when I'm asked to do this, I find it sometimes helpful to really sit and think, slow down and go, how do I actually feel right now? Seeing a whole range of different words in the chat, which definitely captures the whole range of things that we all feel. All right, I just want to thank everyone for participating in that. Feel free to keep adding those if you'd like to. And with that, I'm gonna transition to talking about my teaching and unpacking it, teaching Unpack. And just a quick logistical note, which is that we're gonna switch the chat back to where it just messages the panelists so that it will turn back into a way to have tech questions in just a moment, just so you know. All right, so for today, talking under the big umbrella of experiential learning and being trauma informed, I wanted to wind back in my mind to a teaching experience that I had at this point almost 10 years ago, which was kind of wild to think that it's been that long. But you know, I currently teach at the community college level, and I do experiential learning with that group. But in thinking about, you know, what story do I want to talk about, I was thinking back to a program that I used to help co-teach called the Cooperative, which was part of the alternative therapeutic school where I worked here in Vermont. And this school in general was a place where students were referred, usually through the special education process, if they needed more support than was available in their public school. And so the typical student at our school was supported almost at a one-to-one level for most of the day. So there, it was one student with one teacher or two students with one teacher, but a very high level of support based on what they needed. And so, but we had lots of students who kind of wanted a little more independence, maybe wanted to work towards transitioning back to their public school, or simply wanted to take on, you know, more group work and leadership. And so we developed this program within our school called the Cooperative. So this was a half-day program. So students were still in the school, but they were with us for half of the day, and they applied to be part of it. And we gathered the students who were really interested in that student leadership, community building, group work, and experiential learning. We had about 4 to 6 students and 2 to 3 teachers, kind of depending on the semester and how many folks we had interested. And we had semester-long themes that we would explore through experiential and problem-based learning. So the first year we looked at food systems, and being in Vermont, many rich opportunities to go on field trips and interview experts and do kind of mini projects. And then also, you know, we had a kitchen right near our classroom, so cook together. In the second year, we looked at sustainability, and specifically we looked a lot at sustainability in our school and things we could improve in our school building. So it was in the context of that second year, the sustainability theme, that I did this lesson. And the lesson I'm going to share is intentionally, I chose something kind of small, because I think when we think about experiential learning, sometimes my mind at least goes to mega project, big interdisciplinary themes, complicated, hard to set up. But experiential learning doesn't have to mean all those things. It can. But I wanted to give an example of something that sort of started on kind of a smaller level. So this lesson was in the fall of 2011. And if you remember the fall of 2011, I know it's hard to think back that long at this point, but in the fall of 2011, the Occupy Wall Street movement was happening. And there were youth-led protests and gatherings happening, especially in New York. There were some offshoots in other cities. And my students were pretty interested in it. And I think seeing a lot of the news and a lot of the youth-led protests were sort of, you know, their interest was sparked about what is this and how does it work, and, you know, what are they trying to do. And so we were also, this was, I think in September, October, so we were just starting to build how we were as a group together and how we were going to, you know, tackle these projects that we were starting and this big theme of sustainability. And so I found this video, which I'm not going to show now, but I've linked it in the resources that I believe Laura is going to send out, or already has sent out. Yes. And so you can watch this whole video later. But this video looked at the tools of direct democracy and consensus building among the Occupy Wall Street protesters. So they interviewed different leaders, many of them youth activists, and they talked about how they practice consensus. So what was the process of talking through an issue? How did they amplify one another's voices? What were the tools that they used to say, hey, I don't agree with this, or we need to talk about this point more? There were some hand signals that they used. So we watched this video together, and, you know, I had my nice graphic organizer that that students did while we watched the video, and we did the pause and talk about it, you know, all my good teaching tools. And so we studied this as sort of a mentor text of how to collaboratively make decisions. And then it was time to practice it. So I wanted to pick something that was relevant enough for students. And so we picked snack food. And the way that we did this was I basically just sat with the group and I said, hey, I'm going to bring in a snack tomorrow, and we all need to be on the same page about what we're going to eat. So we need to use these consensus tools to decide what we're going to do. So we went to it. You know, the teachers sat in the circle, but we let the students come to a consensus on their own, and we were there to kind of prompt them to use the tools that they had. So they had their graphic organizer with them. So if they you know, misused one of the hand symbols, or if they forgot what the language was, we might prompt them. But other than that, we really let them go to it. I remember it being a very lively discussion. I was trying to think yesterday what they actually picked, and my memory is not good enough to go back 9 years and know what snack food they picked. But I do remember that it was a you know, fun and lively experience practicing that. And then after that, you know, from there, that was that was the lesson. But then from there, we really used this consensus experience throughout the year and throughout the semester. So coming back to it if we had another decision to make. So that could be something like, you know, if we had one group member who wasn't on board with the plan for the day, or if we had, you know, we did these sustainability projects where students came up with different actions they wanted to take for our school, but then eventually we had to kind of choose one that we were going to work on. And so we would come back to these consensus tools over and over to use them throughout the year. So that's the lesson that I'm looking at. And so where we'll move to now is I want to just explain a little bit of, you know, this unpacking. So when I look back at this lesson, what went into it, and how does it connect to experiential learning, and how does it connect to being trauma informed? You know, trauma is a pretty common experience among students at this school, and so every decision we made there was pretty informed by that. So one of the things I think about, like I mentioned before, was that this was a pretty bite-sized lesson, and I just realized the pun that I made about snack food, bite-size. I can only see Tom and Laura, but I'm assuming all of you participants are similarly delighted at my sparkling wit. So this was a pretty bite-sized lesson, and I think that especially in the fall or at the start of a learning experience, it can be overwhelming for all students, let alone students who've experienced trauma, to jump right into really big and complex problem-based challenges. And if you look at this graphic that's on the screen, this kind of describes the increasing complexity and authenticity and self-direction that's needed to do bigger problem-based challenges. And you really need that time and experience to build those skills. And so this was a nice lesson because it was authentic and it had some degree of uncertainty, but for the start of the year, right, it was really pretty simple. So that's one thing I think about a lot, is that scaffolding of, you know, the very first activity in the year. If you make it too big, it can be so overwhelming that students kind of freeze up and it's hard to move forward. The next piece is around emotional resonance. So I think about this when I think about as you're practicing those problem-based learning skills and creating experiential opportunities, I think a lot about how to make things emotionally resonant enough that students care about them, but not so vulnerable that students shut down or feel afraid or unsafe. So in this activity, for example, you know, consensus decision making, if you've ever participated in it, it can be a very intimate experience, because the idea behind consensus decision making is that every single person's opinion matters, and we're not moving forward until we're all on the same page. And so if you're authentic in expressing your ideas in consensus decision making, you can really put yourself out there very vulnerably. And so if we wanted to get to a place where our group was able to truly use consensus decision making, you know, we couldn't just jump right to that really high level of vulnerability. And so where we started was around this snack food thing, which, you know, snacks at the end of the day, they don't matter that much, but they don't not matter to teenagers, right? This was a group of probably 10th through 12th graders, and snacks matter to 10th through 12th graders, especially because I didn't bring them in a lot, so this was like very special. And so I think about that too when you're doing, getting to know you and community building activities, is that you don't want to pick something that's kind of meaningless, but you also don't want to pick something that's jumping too far too fast. And so kind of balancing that emotional resonance is something I think about with this. Shared power is another piece of why consensus decision-making was an important thing to do with our group, and also felt, when I look back and think about the connections to being trauma informed is really important. A huge part of being trauma informed is shared power and really deconstructing the dynamics of adults having power over children in schools. And so consensus decision making is the mode by which you can actually make that real, at the same time as recognizing that you can't use consensus decision making for every single decision. In school, I'm now questioning myself, because I think maybe there is a situation where if you've built the school culture around that, maybe that's something you could do. But it's a balance, right? Because you don't want students to feel that everything is up in the air and therefore I can't predict anything and therefore I don't feel safe. And then at the same time, you also don't want students to feel that I don't have an input into anything. And so we didn't use consensus decisions for every single decision we made, but we really tried to identify what are those places where it really matters that everyone has a voice, versus what are the times where, as the adults, as the professionals, we're going to kind of structure and guide things. And then finally, these last two pieces around connecting to the moment and positioning youth as leaders. Part of why I picked this example was just the resonance of our current moment and the youth-led protests and activism going on all around our country right now and all around the globe. And it was obviously a very different moment in fall 2011, but with some kind of similar things going on. And so students were really interested, and they wanted to know about what youth leaders were doing, and they wanted to understand how to use those tools for themselves. And so it wasn't just about how are we taking this tool and using it in our classroom, but also how are we building those tools that you can then use in the movements that you're a part of or that you want to be part of, and providing those models of youth as leaders. And I think in our school in particular, it's very small school. Students often came to us feeling cast out from their public school sometimes, feeling like, they were not connected to other youth in the same way. And so providing this really practical tool for being a leader and for making decisions felt like a really important thing to do. So where I'm going to go from here is now pull out a little bit with some kind of bigger thoughts on trauma-informed ed and experiential learning, not necessarily specifically connected to this scenario, but just tying in this thread of experiential ed and what I know and what I study about trauma-informed practices. So there's two big themes that I think are really important to understand. One is around emotional safety, and I've referenced this a little bit already, but I think that when we think about experiential education, right, it's there in the name, it's an experience. And the reason why experiential ed is so powerful is because it does really pull together, it says learning is not something where you separate your brain from your body and your emotions. It's all together. It's something we're doing, and it's something we're being, which is what makes it so powerful. And it's what makes it kind of scary. And for some students who've experienced trauma or maybe who have anxiety, it can feel like really vulnerable to engage in experiential ed and to not be able to kind of distance this is my work and this is me, and never the twain shall meet, right? If you are a part of what you are studying and learning, right? If you're reflecting on yourself and your experience in relationship to your academics, that's vulnerable. And so it is absolutely essential to spend time creating emotional safety in all kinds of ways. So everything from looking at what are the structures and the systems in the school that lend us to emotional safety, to what are the agreements that run our classroom, and how are we revisiting that, and really, it's not a piece of chart pack that we stick on the wall on the first day and never talk about again, right? How are the agreements actually living? And then building in check-ins and building in times to say, this is working for me or this isn't working for me, helping students self-assess their feelings about what's going on, and also providing students with opportunities so that, so there are some times when they don't need to be so fully vulnerable. I know for me as a learner, I really like experiential learning experiences, and I also really value, if I'm taking a grad class or something and I walk in and I see on the agenda that today we're going to listen to a lecture for 40 minutes. Sometimes that's like a relief to say, okay, I don't have to be on today. So there's that balance, right? Of sort of, I can step forward, I can step back, I can be fully engaged, I can retreat a little bit. So that's one piece I think about. The other piece I've been thinking a lot about lately is curriculum violence. And this is a term studied by Stephanie P. Jones, Dr. Stephanie P. Jones, who has a project called Mapping Racial Violence in Schools. And on the resources page that we have for this webinar, I've linked an article in Teaching Tolerance magazine. It's all about curriculum violence. And curriculum violence really talks about the harm that we can do to students through our actual academics. And it specifically is trying to make a distinction that, we can probably picture examples of teachers being harmful to students because they said something harmful to the student, or they were racist toward a student, or things like that. But curriculum violence is specifically about the harm that we do through our actual teaching. So as an example, there are unfortunately a lot of examples of teachers who create simulations of historical events of oppression that put students in the position of acting out either being oppressed or the oppressor. So for example, a simulation of being an enslaved person in America, a simulation of being a person trapped in the Holocaust. And these activities happen because I think that teachers are told hands-on is good, experiential is good, but they are not talked to about that emotional safety or the idea of curriculum violence. And so there's not necessarily that critical thinking of not all experiential learning is good. And so we have to be really careful that in the process of being experiential, we're not asking students to enact trauma. We're not asking students to empathize with people that don't need our empathy, right? I've seen some lessons online about, oh, imagine the mindset of a slaveholder. Slaveholders don't need us to have empathy for why they chose to own people. You can be experiential in ways that put students in the positions of on the side of justice, right? In the consensus lesson that I did, students, we weren't doing a simulation, but students were in a position of aligning themselves with the youth activists. They were looking at how can I be like and use the tool of these youth activists. We weren't saying, let's learn both sides of youth activists versus a bank owner, right? There doesn't have to be two sides of everything. You don't have to put students in roles of people that you don't actually want them to emulate. And so I think just using a really critical lens, understanding anti-racist teaching approaches, and learning more about curriculum violence so that you can make sure you're not doing it. So if we do it right, and I realize I have this phrase here, get it right, but there is not one right way to do trauma-informed learning, and there's not one right way to do experiential learning. But when we get that sweet spot of emotional resonance, when we get the sweet spot of it's powerful, but it's not traumatizing, when we align students in powerful roles, the outcome is empowerment. And I don't mean like feel good, rah, rah empowerment. I mean literally feeling that power of I have agency, I can impact the world, my voice matters. And we also have the development of what Nell Noddings calls a competence in caring. Nell Noddings is an educational philosopher, and she writes that students should be encouraged to work together to help one another, not just to improve academic performance, but to gain competence in caring. So the idea that students are already caring, but to practice the skills of how do I show up as a caring person in community, they need practice and they need support and feedback, and the ability to enact that in their day-to-day school. And so to me, that's really the promise of using experiential learning in trauma-informed ways, is to build that competence in caring. All right, I think that's where I'll end for right now and transition into a conversation with Tom and Laura.
Oh, well, we also have a bunch of questions. So we'll save some space for those. One of the things that I always find interesting, because I follow you on Twitter, so I feel like I learn a lot just by listening to how you respond to other folks' questions and their things that people sort of highlight. There's that whole paired texts thing that's going on that I'm learning a ton from. But one of the things that you mentioned before that you sort of touched on here, but I want to make sure you have a chance to respond to, are some of the really common community builders that folks use, particularly once we're not socially distancing. Things that involve like blindfolding kids or telling kids they can't talk, or touching kids, or ways that, things that teachers may be doing that they may not even think of as being not, being a thing that they'd even need to consider being trauma informed about. And I wonder if you can talk just a minute about how folks can look at their community builders through a trauma-informed lens, so they don't make it worse when they're trying to build that community.
Right. Yeah. So I'm thinking about things like, like the human knot, where you have to hold. It's so funny talking about these because hopefully people are not going to be doing these for a while anyway. But I mean, the human knot, or I'm going to be blindfolded while you tell me the obstacle course, or you tell me what to draw, all those kind of things. So with those types of activities, the thing that I go back to is that for all people, but maybe especially for kids who've experienced trauma, their body is their body. And to promote a culture of consensus, people are in charge of their own body and have to affirmatively consent to other people touching them, restricting their eyesight, restricting their hearing, restricting their movement. And so if we ask kids to, okay, everybody put on blindfolds, everybody hold the hand of your partner, we're kind of creating a situation where we would be asking them to say no, as opposed to asking them to affirmatively consent to join in. And we know that in classrooms where a person of power, your teacher, is asking you to do something, that doesn't really create a condition for real consent, because what are the consequences if I say no? And what are people gonna think about me if I say no? And wow, I feel really panicky when I put on a blindfold, but people are gonna judge me, and I don't wanna be the teacher's helper instead of actually bonding with my peers. And so that's the frame that I use to think about that stuff. But like I said, hopefully we're not doing those things anyway for the next while. But it is interesting to think about, as we have online classes or distance classes, just using that lens of consent. I've been talking with some folks about what consent means around Zoom cameras being on or off. And my Twitter friend, Karen Ray Costa, who is working more in the higher ed sphere, has written a couple of really great pieces about trauma and Zoom cameras. I tweeted one of her pieces yesterday, but I encourage folks to check her work out, because she really digs into some of those considerations.
Could you maybe drop her handle onto your resources page?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Sorry, Tom.
Speaking of the resources page, and another very practical question, Alex, and I'm not sure if you've put it up there or not, but I wonder if you have a particular protocol that you follow for that consensus decision-making activity. Is there, are there a set of steps that or is it all in your head at this point?
So where it is in my Google account at that school, which I sadly had to leave behind me when I left that school. So I had a great, outline at some point that I don't have anymore. But if you watch that consensus video, which is on the resources page and on YouTube, it has some pretty clear sections and some pretty clear tools. And I think teachers who watch it would be able to pretty easily construct, a graphic organizer or some steps around it. But I would also encourage people, so that video at this point is almost 10 years old, and I don't know that students today, I mean, it could be cool for students today to look at a past youth-led movement, but also there are amazing youth organizers doing work right now on Black Lives Matter and on a whole host of other issues, on the climate. And so I would encourage folks to maybe do some looking. And if you're not already familiar with any youth-led activism organizations, take a look and see what's out there, what tools those organizations have come up with, what videos are connected with them, because there's just gold out there, and finding things that are relevant today is going to be really relevant to students.
Before we got to open it up to questions from the audience in just a moment. Now, Alex, I really appreciated the way in which you framed experiential education as doing things and reflecting on them, and often those involve either real world scenarios or actually being out in the community and doing things either with community members as resources or as an audience. Do you have any thoughts about that reflection process? So when the consensus, the community building and the consensus was a great example of a tool that both implements and practices experiential education. And it feels like that then the thinking about what we did and then using it, connecting it to later learning. So any thoughts about reflection as part of that process?
Yes, and I love reflection. Let me see, I think I have on here, we have some tools connected to the critical skills model, which you can find more info on our resources page. But what you're looking at is what we lovingly refer to as the Snail of experiential learning. And it looks at this cycle of designing experiences, coaching students through those experiences, and then engaging in feedback. And for students, engaging in those experiences, exhibiting their learning, and debriefing. And when you look at this together, so this is a little blurry, I apologize, but you can see that those two experiential cycles are connected in the middle by reflecting and connecting. And so that reflecting and connecting is really important to look at, you know, what went well in our experience, what didn't go well, what do I want to change. And this is really powerful for all kids, and maybe especially for kids who've experienced trauma, in really internalizing that power that even if things didn't go that well, I have an opportunity to do it differently next time. You know, sometimes kids can kind of catastrophize or go into a shame, feelings of shame that if I messed up, it's all over. This is ruined forever, you know, that kind of stuff. And so just by virtue of that cycle, you're reinforcing this idea that we always have opportunities to change and grow. And in fact, the whole point of having done that activity is to change and grow. And we're going to do it again differently next time. And I find both as a participant in these cycles and as a facilitator, it's really freeing, because you can imagine that in this cycle, summative grades aren't really a thing. And you can plug them in there if you have to, but ideally you're not. And so it becomes less about this grade is going to define what this experience was like, and more about, let's just keep rolling on this cycle. Let's keep going. Let's take what worked. Let's let go of what didn't work and keep going. And that's something that I really value, both having been a learner and been a facilitator in this kind of model.
Can we open it up to some questions now?
Please.
We have several. So the first one is going back to the beginning of your talk when you were talking about consensus. One of the participants asked, you know, they really like the example of the snack, but they're wondering if there are some examples of consensus in other PBL activities that you've done, or other experiential activities that you've done that maybe you could talk about quickly.
Sure. So we also, in the cooperative, a couple of different times, we had students design the physical space that we were in. So, you know, we had a classroom with kind of an office next to it and a common area. And so we figured out where to put all the furniture and what was going to go on the walls and things like that. I think in that particular situation, we didn't use a consensus model and more just kind of a group working together. But that could be a situation. Basically, good opportunities for consensus are decisions that affect everybody in sometimes significant ways. So I think I mentioned another example was that students had individually identified different opportunities for sustainability improvements to our school. And so, you know, one student looked at changing the lighting that we used. One student looked at building a greenhouse. One student looked at, we had a couple of cars that we used as a school, and so looking at the sustainability of those cars. And how we designed the semester was that we were going to move from those individual projects to then picking one that we would all take on different parts to try to make it happen. And so that was a pretty big decision that affected everybody, where everyone was going to have to be part of it. And so it mattered that everyone's voice was part of that decision. So we did that. You could also use consensus decision-making for, I mean, really all kinds of things, you know, from if you're doing what's called negotiated curriculum or student input into the curriculum, you know, which unit are we going to do next, or what, you know, which community partner do we want to bring in? Really, there's all kinds of things. But again, it has to be something that actually does affect everybody, because otherwise you probably will have some students that say, well, I don't really care, it doesn't matter to me. It needs to be something that does matter to everybody.
You know, Alex, one of the things you're making me think about is how a consensus building activity is in a sense, for some of us, it's practicing disagreeing.
Yes.
You know, so I was thinking about the kind of classic thumbs tool where you say, you know, thumbs up if you agree, you know, thumbs to the side if you can live with it,
Yes.
and thumbs down if you need to talk, if we still need to talk about this, you know, because there's still important things to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so that idea, for some of us, the idea of disagreeing and saying, no, wait, I want to talk about this more, that's hard.
Yeah.
And then And then for some of us, we need to practice not being a blocker all the time and like
Mhm.
always bringing up something else that is going to keep us from reaching a decision.
Yes, and in the video that I used, there were examples of they talked about the distinction between I don't agree, but I can live with it, and I don't agree, and we can't move on. And I think what is also cool about using examples of youth activism is that throughout the history of organizing and activism and action and social movements, there are many times that you can point to where movements split or formed different groups because there was one of those situations where actually people fundamentally disagreed. And so someone said, you know what, I'm going to start something new, or I'm going to start an offshoot where we can do this in a different way. I mean, you could even connect that to like history of religions and countries and all that stuff. And so there is so much richness you could explore there about, you know, I think that right now, I guess always, but right now, yeah, that feeling of not agreeing sometimes just turns into conflict. And consensus kind of gives you some tools about how could this be generative or lead to something that lifts us all up or lead to something new. And that's exciting to think about.
And that leads in so well to our next question.
Great.
In my 4-5 class, I strive for a child-centered culture of inclusion and affirmation. I have a group of boys that are very negative and down on anything and everything that is inclusive or overtly caring. Any inquiry into what they want or giving them a bigger voice ends up as a contest for who can come up with the worst, rudest answer, and they laugh among themselves when the other children get upset. How do I help them overcome their impulse to wreck things for others as a form of personal entertainment?
So it's fitting that I have this slide up still because it reminds me that we do have to build that competence and practice, and that learning how to be in a caring community does not come naturally for some, or we all come with different ideas about what it means to be in a caring community. So we have to figure out what brings us all together. So I'll give you one resource recommendation and then just a couple of thoughts. My resource recommendation is the book Troublemakers by Carla Shalaby. And I'll tell you that this is not a book that has a list of strategies, but it is a truly fantastic book on the topic of caring communities in elementary school, and I think would spark some wonderful ideas. And then just my couple of thoughts are, you know, building. So it's one thing to say, I want to build an inclusive, caring community, but also we have to give students something to connect about and to include in. And so sometimes I think about, you know, does my group have a shared identity that we can refer back to? And who is determining what that identity is? So if I, as the teacher, am saying, I care about inclusion and I care about getting along, that's nice, but my students never agreed that they care about that. And so I think about ways to facilitate that. So one thing that I did in the cooperative and I've done in other settings was I had this resource that was just a word cloud of a bunch of different values. So things like courage, empathy, helping others, personal success, family, tradition, you know, all kind of different values. And I have a version of that I can put on the resource page. And what we did was each student individually went through that cloud and they highlighted things that they really cared about. And we had some reflection about, you know, what they thought about it and why they chose it. And then they narrowed it down to, you know, they had to pick only 4 or 5. And then we had some discussion as a group about what overlapped in our group and what did we have in common that we cared about. And then we decided to choose. And I don't remember if we used the consensus process on this or if I used a different process. We decided to choose what are going to be our values as a classroom together. What are our community values? And in that conversation, you can talk about the difference between something I value personally and something I value in our community. And that allows students to define for themselves and to be a true part of saying, what matters to them. And, you know, of course, I'm not going to put on that values page being mean to other people, right? Like I'm going to put value, you know, I'm going to put values I think that students can positively connect to, because I truly believe though that students, they want to be in community. They do care about others. And so sometimes it's just finding the language that resonates or the framing that resonates with how they think about caring with others. So I think,
Alex, you're making me think about the very first Teaching Unpacked episode with Danica Tyminski, who gave, for those of you who are upper elementary people, she gave some really good examples of exactly what you're saying, Alex, at that upper elementary level for building community and kind of taking what matters to the children in that community and distilling it down to its essence so that it's something they can all agree on and then practice for the whole year.
Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, I think if you've been teaching a while, it can feel like, you know, because I'll always have a conversation at the start of the year about what makes a learning space feel great, what makes a learning space not feel great, and based on that, what do we want our learning space to be? And really, almost every time, the group will come up with basically the same stuff, but there's a huge difference in making time for that conversation versus saying, well, I've done this 10 times, so I know what you're going to say. So here's our expectations, right? there's a huge difference there in buy-in.
Yeah, that is definitely true. Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. And what I'll do, Alex, there are a couple of questions that we're not going to get to, so I will drop those into an email to you, and then you can answer them and we'll put them on the resources page if you have time. What are your thoughts on negative impacts with students who are not ready to learn because of stress or trauma from the current pandemic when we return to virtual or in-person instruction? Can this be mitigated with an awareness and space to meet them where they are and build connection and community? Or do you have any advice on that?
Mm-hmm. So I have a lot to say. I have a lot to say about learning in the pandemic, and I'll say that I think I'll have to add it to the resources page if it's not there already, but I did write a little piece about considerations for teachers in using the pandemic as a learning scenario or learning opportunity, like pandemic math or whatever. But that's not exactly the question, because I think what this person is asking is more about just readiness to learn and feeling safe enough and able to learn despite what's going on. So I think part of what I'll say is that I feel like I need to like paint on the wall above my desk, we're in a frickin' global pandemic and have it there, because sometimes I think that in the rush to, we gotta return to school, the semester's starting, we're getting back to work, stuff is reopening, we're still in a global pandemic. We're in a moment of change that will have ripple effects for the rest of our lifetime and probably after that. So this is not normal. This is not regular times. And this school year, I hope we'll have success. I hope we'll have joy. And I don't think we should hold ourselves to an expectation that this is going to be a banner year, best ever in education. We're all going to make leaps and bounds. Because sometimes when we are being asked to survive despite incredible stress, sometimes just surviving is enough. And so if I could give one piece of advice to people for this coming school year, it's slow down, slow way down, simplify everything you possibly can, really focus in on building those relationships, focus in on, much less content than you ordinarily would do, because things are going to take longer. And you've probably noticed in yourself, many of you, right, that stuff that you easily did before takes longer now. Your attention span is shorter. You find yourself less able to grapple with complex thoughts than before. All of that is going to be true for some students. And of course, you'll have a spectrum of how students are affected. You might have some who are like, all right, let's go. I'm ready to be in school. I've missed this, whether it's online or in person. I'm ready to go. I want to learn. You'll have some students who want to get going and just find themselves having a hard time, and you'll have a whole spectrum. And so I guess my hope, and I guess this will be where we close too. My hope for everyone is slow down, focus in on building relationships and creating that culture of care, and also be gentle with yourself, because there are a lot of expectations out there. There's a lot of pressures, and we got to survive to do any of it. So I hope that folks can turn some of that gentleness towards yourself that you might have for your students, or you might have for your colleagues or your family. Make sure you're giving yourself some of that too.
Yeah, and with that, we're really almost out of time. Closing comment, Tom, Alex?
I think, Alex, you gave us the perfect close for today's episode, and thank you so much. And to just say that we are planning coming up in an upcoming Teaching Unpacked episode to specifically be talking about how teachers and schools are planning for going back into the school year. And so that'll be coming up. People will be hearing about that in a Teaching Unpacked episode. And I am sure, Alex, that it's going to include not just remote learning, but remote relationship. How do we build remote relationship that leads to learning? So thank you for reminding us about that.
Yeah,
no problem,
Alex.
And if I can plug myself really quickly, a week from Monday, I'll be doing a Pay What You Can webinar to talk about some additional trauma-informed considerations for the return to school, and folks can find that on my website.
And there's a link to your website on the resources page, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so also just to let folks know, we are going to go on hiatus for a few weeks. So we will be back. You can find information about past episodes on our website, which I just dropped into the chat. And there's also a link on our resource on every resources page to the big website with everything. We'll send out an announcement to everyone who's registered for a webinar, letting them know when we're starting again, and that'll also be on the webpage. So thank you, Alex, so much for being our penultimate guest. Is that the word I'm looking for? It's been a real joy to have this conversation with you. And looking at the comments in the chat, people are just saying, oh, wonderful, thank you, thank you, thank you. So, and no, there isn't a hashtag. We don't have, we sort of have a hashtag Teaching Unpacked, but I don't think anybody's used it but me.
Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alex. Bye, everyone.